International Quality of Life Awards Distinguished Lecture Series. I'm Susan Hubbard, Dean of the College of Human Sciences, and I know this room is filled with many former colleagues, friends, and family of our distinguished speaker, but also we're delighted to see so many of our current students in human sciences here as well. No matter what brought you here today, prepare to be enlightened and inspired. No pressure, June. Enlightened and inspired. I'm certain we will walk away with a stronger and better understanding and a shared respect for the history and evolution of the College of Human Sciences. A very special welcome today to someone who knows that history all too well, Dean Ruth Galbraith, who served as Dean when we were known as the School of Home Economics. So welcome, Dean Galbraith. We're thrilled you're here. We also have with us this afternoon our first ever recipients of the Spirit of Iqla scholarships with us today. And two of those students sitting here up front, I will look forward to introducing to you a little bit later in the program after our esteemed speaker. For 28 years, every December, the College of Human Sciences hosts the International Quality of Life Awards, recognizing people, partnerships, and organizations that have made significant and lasting impressions and contributions to the quality of life locally and globally. Honorees have included Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, former Archbishop Desmond Tutu, St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, and sports legends like Bo Jackson, to name only a few. Each spring, this distinguished lecture series brings the past IQLA honorees to share their life experience with us, our students, and our community. Today, we are honored to feature our 2021 IQLA Lifetime Achievement Award recipient, Dr. June Henton. I'm fortunate to call our speaker a close friend and mentor after working under her leadership for over 25 years. We were both 12 when we started. During her time as Dean of the College of Human Sciences from 1985 until 2019, June Henton provided visionary leadership and a strong guiding hand in the changing face of human sciences during this very pivotal time period. Her vision to share Auburn University with the rest of the world and broaden the student perspective led to Auburn's only permanent year-round overseas campus in Arica, Italy, and the Joseph S. Bruno Auburn Abroad in Italy program. She launched an ongoing battle filled with partnership and research to fight hunger locally and around the world, resulting in the Hunger Solutions Institute and a strong coalition of universities and presidents united for the cause. In the 1980s, when the common thought among some was to allow the human sciences to blend with other colleges, June Henton fought to establish and expand departments and to create initiatives, resulting in a college that today offers multiple nationally ranked programs and has the second highest career placement ranking on Auburn's campus, along with the #1 ranking for four-year graduation rates. Her work over the years has earned multiple awards, including the White House Champion of Change Award for her work in food security, a Lifetime Achievement Award presented by the Board on Human Sciences of APLU, and a Pamela Wells Sheffield Award presented to a woman who best exemplifies selfless service and commitment to Auburn University and the Auburn family. June, your legacy continues to change lives, and we are honored to hear from you today. Please join me in welcoming Dean Emeritus June Henton.
Good afternoon. Let me quickly say that the 25 years that I've spent working with Susan Hubbard have been some of the best that I can remember. We've always been on the same page, always looking forward rather than backward, which was a bit of a challenge when she told me she wanted me to talk about the history of home economics today. But I really appreciate having all of you come out for this. This really is my first my first official visit back to campus since I retired almost 3 years ago. So it is just wonderful to see so many familiar faces. I saw some of you last December in Nashville. I was so honored to receive the IQLA Lifetime Achievement Award, so thank you again, Susan, for that. It was heartening. It was exciting to look backwards. So Dean Hubbard got in touch with me after that was over and said, will you come and retell a part of that again that you talked about, but expand it a little bit, because so many of our students don't really know the history of our field. And we have a long one, extending all the way from the middle of the 19th century to the present. You understand that telling this story could take weeks. I'm not going to take it. I'm going to do my best just to hit the high points. And so you students who are here, and I know a lot of you are here because you're required to be here. If you're taking notes, let me just tell you up front that hitting the high points means if you go away with 3 things about the history of our field, I'm going to be really happy. 1, Ellen Richards, who is considered to be the founder of our field. Land-grant universities, which were the first to offer home economics programs, and where many of the strongest programs in human sciences still reside. And the Lake Placid conferences, where home economics was named and became a profession. My assigned question today is, how did we get here? So let me tell you how I got here. From domestic science to home economics, to family and consumer sciences, to human sciences, and many more that I could name. We have absolutely run the gamut on names of our profession. But you'll need to understand that all of this was for good reason. If you track the progress of the human sciences through the decades, you will see that in general, it runs parallel with the evolution of the women's movement. Because our roots are in women's education, we have been forced to redefine and reinvent ourselves over and over as changes occur in the world around us. And where men have played a very important role in our history as well, I'll be talking mostly about women today. As Martina McBride once sang about, this one's for the girls. In a very interesting book that was just published last year called The Secret History of Home Economics, the author, Danielle Dreilinger, asked the question, when you imagine the founder of home economics, who do you see? Betty Crocker, Donna Reed, I probably would add to that list June Cleaver, to that esteemed list of stereotypes. But no, surprising as it may seem to the uninformed, home economics was actually founded by a female scientist by the name of Ellen H. Henrietta Richards. Her maiden name was Ellen Swallow. Ellen was born in 1842, a mere 6 years after the historic Seneca Falls, New York Women's Rights Convention that we all talk about. She grew up in Massachusetts with working class parents who highly valued education. And they knew that Ellen was a very smart cookie. She was a real achiever. And they didn't have very good options for where to send her to school, so they homeschooled her. And she went through that in the early years, and then finally they moved to town so she could go to Westford Academy, which was one of the oldest co-ed schools in the state, where she studied the classics. But when she finished at the academy, Ellen wasn't sure what she was going to do. Many colleges at that time didn't even accept women, and Ellen Swallow's family was relatively poor. So going on to higher education for her was going to be a big problem. But that's what she wanted to do. So she worked and saved her money and finally was able to attend and receive her 2-year degree from Vassar College, just across the state line in New York, which at that time was an all-women's school focused on the liberal arts. At Vassar, Ellen came into her own. She became absolutely enthralled by the study of science. She graduated from Vassar in 1870, and after working for a couple of years and with great encouragement from her employers, she applied and was admitted to the all-male Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Yes, that MIT, where she learned to love chemistry. And I think the reason for that was that she was looking for solutions to problems. She wanted to help women who were struggling in so many different areas in the home, such as food safety, household sanitation, and energy conservation. But don't ask her to clean house. And don't ask me to clean house. No, seriously. She was all about being an independent woman, using science, technology, and hiring someone else to do what she called household drudgery. And it just reminded me of my own home, because anytime my mother wanted my dad to do something that he didn't want to do, he would always say, well, let's give the other man a little work. So that's always our response. If we don't want to do something, let's just hire it out. And she was doing great as a single woman, working on water quality, environmental hazards, science for women, and innovations for the home. Ellen was not looking for a husband, but reluctantly, after putting him off for 2 whole years, she finally married Robert Richards, an MIT mineralogy professor. Is it any wonder that some women delayed or even chose not to marry at all, when you realize that marriage in those days involved losing many of their individual rights, such as the right to own property in their own name, to sign a contract, or to claim wages that they themselves had earned. I guess Ellen decided, finally, that the balance of power wasn't all in her husband's, on her husband's side. She had made quite a name for herself at MIT, renowned for having both a social conscience and a brilliant scientific mind. Ellen Swallow Richards' academic credentials included a second bachelor's degree from MIT, a master's from Vassar, and professionally, she became the first female instructor at MIT. Not too shabby, even by today's standards. All right, students, here we go. Switching to land grants. While Ellen Richards was doing her work, there was a great deal of concern about the level of education, the overall concern about people not being educated in much of the country. The Civil War was devastating in so many ways, and its aftermath sparked tremendous social change. The impact of emancipation itself, industrialization, and urbanization marked a new way of life and required a different kind of college experience for students. In response, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Morrill Act in 1862, which established the land grant system, providing funding for each state to have a university that educated not the elites, but the common person, what we call the masses. Land grants were formed to carry out 3 mandated functions. They were supposed to teach students, obviously, instruction in the agricultural and mechanical arts. They were supposed to conduct research, agricultural research, I should say, and deliver knowledge and practical information to farmers and consumers. Enter home economics. With the primary focus on agriculture and rural life, land grants tended to be located in places like here in Auburn, in more remote areas. And with And because the 1862 land grant funding never got distributed fairly, in 1890, a second moral act was passed to establish land grant universities for African Americans across the South. In that bill, funding was provided for what we now call the 1890 land grants, but it also extended funding to one private university designated explicitly by name, Tuskegee. Who knew there would be someone blazing a trail for women's education only 20 miles down the road from Auburn? Margaret Murray, born in Macon, Mississippi in 1865, just at the end of the war, she was an extraordinary pioneer in home economics. She attended Fisk College in Nashville, Tennessee, a very prestigious institution now referred to as an HBCU. After graduation, Margaret applied for a teaching position at Tuskegee, whose president at that time was Booker T. Washington. She was hired to teach English, and in a year she became the Dean of Women and took over the domestic science program. She ultimately became Booker T. Washington's third wife and embarked on a campaign to lift up black families through domestic education. She was actually running laundry labs, all kinds of things to give students experiences, really to train them for domestic help. She wrote the first household manual, Work for the Colored Women of the South, and expanded her audience through leadership of the Tuskegee Women's Club and eventually a whole federation of African American women's clubs. Okay, so this was happening in the South. Back in the Northeast, Ellen Richards had been joined in her work by several other key women leaders. In 1899, just before the turn of the century, and just before hotelier Annie Dewey and her husband had just purchased property in upstate New York and had established a club called the Lake Placid Club, where she was, of course, ready to host a group of leaders to a conference that eventually was the first Lake Placid Conference. She recruited Ellen Richards and just a handful of others. I think there were only 11 people at that first Lake Placid event, but of course did not include Margaret Murray Washington, because minorities were prohibited from entering the club, I should say. But this small Lake Placid group, they got a lot of work done in a short amount of time and with very little controversy. They were of a common mind. They adopted an overarching goal. According to Dreilinger, she says they wanted to convince universities to embrace home science as a serious study in order to create a new profession commanding adequate compensation. Women's work in the home was never valued because women didn't get paid for doing it. After much discussion, the group named the new profession home economics. They worked on the curriculum, and they even debated what the Dewey Decimal number should be. Hopefully not with needlepoint, they argued, but something like sociology. And Vinnie Nathan, our new provost, is sitting here. I think about we're still fighting over zip codes. The Lake Placid attendees became the movers and shakers in the field. They were politically well-networked at the national level, which allowed them to have significant influence on politics affecting women, such as the establishment of a women's bureau at the federal level. The Lake Placid conferences continued for 10 years, slowly but surely pulling in the leaders of the land-grant home economics programs. But one group they never cracked was the classical women's colleges, like the Seven Sisters, which considered housework to be too unimportant to study in higher education. And I suspect that was a function of who the students were to a large extent. Affluent women, not really expecting to have to work or even do very much housework on their own. Okay, let's talk about Auburn now. Back in the early days, the education of women at Auburn actually started with cooperative extension. Don't be surprised by that. It was primarily food safety and teaching women to can, all kinds of things that were useful to them. And of course, eventually it became an academic unit on its own. Dr. Mary Ann Potter is sitting here. I have her to thank for flagging a new book that I did not know about until recently. It's called Auburn, A History in Street Names by Sam Hendricks. In the book, he wrote about Louise Glanton, a name you might recognize if you walk by the Marriage and Family Therapy Center over by the concourse at Haley, which used to be a home management house. What's a home management house, you say? Well, it was a practice house, a group living course that students typically took in their senior year, intended to be a capstone experience of what they had learned in their programs. I was delighted to learn more about Louise Glanton, because most of our Golden Eagle alumni, when they come back to campus every year, they don't talk about Louise Glanton. They want to talk about Dana King Gatchell. And Dana King Gatchell, I know, was a very accomplished leader in her own right. And although these two women worked together, it clearly was Louise Glanton who was nationally known for her contributions to the field. By way of introduction, here I quote Sam Hendricks. Louise Phillips Glanton, born in 1869 to a Troup County, Georgia farm family, was not your typical girl of the post-war South. She was educated, traveled the world, made a name for herself as an academic, and became conversant in science and a specialist, get this, in fashion, textiles, nutrition, child development, and even the history of the home in America. She was smart, fashionable, confident, caring, and it turned out financially savvy. She joined the API faculty in 1927 and became, in essence, Auburn's first female academic rock star, end quote. Louise Glanton earned her bachelor's and master's degrees from Columbia in New York City, and later took graduate work in bacteriology, pathology, and public health at Yale. And to top it off, spent a year in Paris at the Sorbonne. What I find to be particularly intriguing, yet poignant, about Louise Glanton was that she evidently gave excellent leadership as program director to the School of Home Economics, earned her spot on the President's Executive Council, but was never given the title of dean, as were her male dean counterparts like Deans Carey, Wilmore, Petrie, and Ross. She resigned at Auburn in 1936 and died in 1958. Strangely enough, the same year that I became a freshman in home economics at Oklahoma State University to study, I thought, fashion merchandising, but changed to home economics education in my senior year when I got married, which again was very typical. And against all odds, who do you think I found to marry? A male home economics student who had transferred in from architecture to study interior design. He was one of a rare breed in our college, I'll tell you. But now get this, being a transfer student and a male, these academic advisors sitting down here, I want them to listen to this. Being a transfer student and a male, he was exempt from taking a number of the requirements that the women had to take, like living in the home management house. And I can tell you that was no small point of controversy over the dinner table at night. Those were the days that students were just beginning to move from a generalized home economics curriculum to specializations in their respective majors. We had a stringent core You students will say, so what else is new about that? And an extensive college corps, which you have no more, but there's a reason for that as well. It was in my college corps, though, that I came to understand that home economics is an integrated field of applied arts and sciences. Now, simple as that, right? Our field was just like engineering, agriculture, architecture, all of the applied arts and sciences. We had our unit of study as the family within its near environment, which we translated as food, clothing, and shelter, and its relationship to the world. How simple that sounds on the surface, but the complexities that come with our many family structures and lifestyles and their interrelationships with communities truly boggle the mind. On top of that, our founders added to the responsibility of building moral character and promoting social justice, a common thread that runs through every home economics major. And the reason for that, I'm sure, was that women were responsible for child rearing for the most part. They were helping them establish their set of values, develop a morality that was appropriate, and a strong work ethic. So this all fell on the shoulders of women. I internalized all of this more and more as we sort of began to get a little more education. We traveled around, my husband and I had no children at the time, traveled around the country getting our master's degrees and on to the University of Minnesota for Ph.D.s in the early 60s, late 60s, I should say. We were young adults, just kids really, who grew up in Oklahoma, wound up in Minnesota, and encountered for the first time a significantly diverse student body where there was much discussion about hot topics like civil rights, politics, and a huge controversy over the Vietnam War. I was majoring in family social science and had a graduate assistantship, and in my first semester, I never will forget, I was invited to a faculty meeting where we had a guest speaker. She was the Dean of Home Economics at Penn State. We had heard this rumored, but she announced publicly to us that Penn State was reorganizing and that home economics was being partially dismantled and undergoing a name change to the College of Human Development. This was a wake-up call. Her message was especially concerning because Penn State had one of the best programs in the nation. That action was soon followed by another nationally acclaimed program at Cornell, staying intact but changing its name to the College of Human Ecology. After these two landmark changes occurred, it was game on. And this went on for years. You'll see it's a 30-year process. From the time we left Minnesota and accepted tenure-track positions at Texas Tech in the late 1960s and the whole decade of the 70s, we stayed there. Home economics deans were constantly on guard against primarily male administrators who didn't understand our philosophy or the integrated nature of our work and saw home economics units as the easy target for reorganization or elimination. I would argue that this was happening for the most part, not because the programs were without merit, but primarily because they were primarily female units and were perceived to have no power. Home economics had been stereotyped from the early days in the science of homemaking, and graduates who were career-bound identified less and less with their home economics background. Students can take just so many credits, as we all well know, and our core, our university core is locked in. So the courses in their majors, as those increased, the core courses in the college decreased, and often their understanding of and commitment to our overarching mission has been diminished. The women's movement was in full swing. In Texas, I was teaching family studies, researching family violence, and helping thousands of students who were confronting massive role change. More and more women were moving into the labor force, still trying to do the jobs of wife and mother, frankly, without much help at home. I was only in my early 30s, and I rode that wave of change with those students, navigating the turbulence of the 60s and 70s counterculture, the Vietnam War protests, the hippie lifestyle, the women's movement, and the Woodstock Music Festival. They were all signs of the time, and they catapulted us into a new era. Parents were scared, this rock music, they didn't know what to think of that. And yeah, we used it in our class. I've played the Beatles' Revolution more times than you can possibly imagine. Just helping students begin to think about this and the changes that were occurring. So it was frightening, but it was exciting as well. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll were real influencers, and they played no small part in the trend toward individualism, seeing women move from the work in the home to pursue careers outside. I took great pride, I will just tell you this, as these young, largely Texas women came to better understand their right to equality and their efforts to build confidence to make decisions on their own. In 1979, now with a husband and 2 small children, I took a position as department head at Oregon State. As a new administrator, of course, I was floundering around, but thankfully I had an excellent dean, Betty Hawthorne, who was former military Navy woman. And I learned what it was like to be in a line position in a fairly patriarchal system, to know how to negotiate what to say and how to say it. I actually have an old NCFR t-shirt from a few years back that says, "I speak fluent patriarchy, but it's not my mother tongue." In the early 80s, there was renewed energy behind passage of the Equal Rights Amendment. But for God's sake, don't say you're a feminist or that you're promoting ecology, and don't complain don't complain or you'll be labeled as a whiner. When I came to Auburn in 1985 to interview for the deanship of the School of Home Economics, Ruth Galbraith was the dean and Jim Martin was the president. Ruth had warned me in advance that there was a mild uproar among Auburn alumni who did not want to change the name of the School of Home Economics. I met with President Martin in his office, and I never will forget his first question that he asked me. He said, "See that stack of letters over there on my desk? How would you respond to all of those people who are against a name change for the School of Home Economics?" As it turned out, his wife, Ann Martin, was one of our alumni. I was definitely in favor of a name change. But you talk about a no-win dilemma, especially because I didn't know exactly where the president himself stood on this whole issue. The proposed name change on the table was School of Human Ecology, which was a good, strong name. It had a lot of national support and objectively may be the most descriptive of what we do, which very generally is to study the relationship between people and their environments. At that time, though, the environment was a hot issue, as I told you, where I was coming from in Oregon, and ecology was definitely a red flag word. So I took the high road and suggested that if I were hired, the name change might be put on a back burner for the time being until we had a chance to assess the situation, or truthfully, until I got through my interview. Well, obviously, I got the job, and We had good, strong programs in the school. Dean Galbraith before me had prioritized research, and she had fought the good fight to compete for Ag Experiment Station funding. I will tell you here this afternoon, just sort of an aside, that Ruth Galbraith's handoff to me as a new dean was flawless. Never one word of criticism, only support was coming my way from wherever she was in the world. And I mean that literally, because she was a world traveler. Not without some controversy, but 2 years later, as you all know, we did change our name from Home Economics to Human Sciences. We were the first in the country to coin the term human sciences, which has been adopted by many universities across the country today, as well as the Board on Human Sciences of APLU. With the advent of globalization and the age of the internet, more and more challenges came our way. Students and faculty stepped up time after time to ensure that we maintained a dynamic, exciting, rigorous learning environment. But now I want you to get the date here, 1998. This is 30 years after I first heard this at Minnesota. In 1998, we nearly met our own Waterloo here at Auburn. University efficiencies were being mandated by the powers that be at Auburn. They were frantically scrambling to find places to cut costs, and human sciences was the target. The word on the street was that, don't worry about this, everything's going to be fine. I was assured by administrators, the board members, they weren't going to eliminate the school, they were just going to dismantle it. Meaning that the programs would be displaced into other colleges. Well, let me tell you, this was not my first rodeo. I knew when programs were displaced, they frequently fell to the bottom of the barrel for the new dean. They were low priority, and vacant positions often were not replaced, not to even speak of the fact that they had virtually no representation at the national level. But we developed a strategy to stay intact, and you would not believe the flurry of activity. We rallied the troops, garnered the support of our most powerful advocates, and weathered the storm. It was quite a campaign. I still have one of my back to the T-shirts again, but this T-shirt was designed by one of our students, and on the front of it had a big old SOS, alerting people. It was surrounded by the words, "Save our school." So with students and faculty and alumni, we made it happen, but it was a lesson well learned, and we shored up our support structure with the help of a lot of people, especially our Dean's Board, our International Board of Advisors, Women's Philanthropy Board, as well as our curriculum boards. The college has grown stronger every year. We've been able to do what I told you in the beginning that we would need to do, which was to redefine and reinvent ourselves, commensurate with the changing needs of society. We not only strengthened our traditional programs, but developed new ones, like global studies, philanthropy and nonprofit studies, and culinary and brewing science. We prioritized globalizing our programs. We developed a statement of beliefs for our college that addressed our commitments to developing moral responsibility and social justice. We wanted our students to appreciate the similarities and differences in people and come to recognize that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. We wanted them to shed their biases and prejudices, to recognize that there is no place in our belief structure for racism, misogyny, or homophobia, and to understand that inclusion is not a zero-sum game. In closing, let me say that we, as human scientists, are very proud of our heritage, which you heard just a little bit about. But we also know there is much work left to be done. Let us remember that those women who came before us have done yeoman's work, clearing the pathway for us to succeed. As Hillary Clinton reminds us, When there are no ceilings, the sky's the limit. So here we are, passing the torch to the next generation to continue to pursue science for a quality life in an effort to make the world a better place. Thanks again to all of you for joining us here this afternoon.
June, this is just a very small token. You get a big gift. Oh, she told me she spent hundreds of hours, so hopefully this is enough. I know she did, but we thank you so very much. Thank you. Please join me again in thanking June. I would like to say that the handoff to me from Dean June Henton was as flawless as the handoff to June Henton from Dean Galbraith. That's what we do in human sciences. Thank you. After that wonderful talk, we now understand those broad and strong shoulders on which we all stand. So thank you for sharing those words. It was so important for us to have that history and, again, to remember who we are and what we are very, very strong roots that we're built on and will continue to grow and flourish. June Henton's desire to improve quality of life is shared, and it's a shared passion in the College of Human Sciences, shared by faculty, staff, and students. Today we celebrate 2 students receiving the first ever Spirit of IQLA scholarships. This endowed scholarship was established in 2020 when we celebrated the heroes of 2019, or COVID-19, during the pandemic time. This was a virtual event, and those nominating heroes during that time knew that the donations in their honor would form a scholarship, and that's exactly what was created. Today, we congratulate our first 2 recipients, and I'd like for them to come and stand with me today, Elena Gagliano and Lanie Hammond. Y'all will stand with me, please. These outstanding students were selected based on their passion that they exhibit through their studies to impact families, individuals, and communities. A little background on their studies and their passion to change the lives around them. First, Elena. Elena is a sophomore pursuing concurrent degrees in human development and family science and psychology with minors in statistics, counseling, and women's and gender studies. Wow. She's from Birmingham and says her time in Auburn has allowed her to explore her passion for helping others through research into bullying interventions, as well as the long-lasting impacts of this experience. Lanie is from Huntsville and is a junior in her second year in the College of Human Sciences Interior Design program. She's interested in sustainability, particularly in helping to mitigate the housing crisis. Through traveling and seeing the impacts of lack of affordable housing has on communities and individuals, Lanie is working toward finding sustainable solutions. These students are still in college and doing this. So how amazing. Again, please join me in congratulating them both. Thank you so much. I appreciate y'all being here today. We look forward to presenting the Spirit of IQLA Scholarship to a deserving student or students again next year. And students, as you begin to leave today, don't forget to register by scanning. I never thought I would be saying those words, scanning on your way out. We hope that you are leaving here inspired to make a difference and with a stronger understanding of the College of Human Sciences and who we are and what we represent. You'll find a table just outside the door with more information on the degrees and other programs available for all ages and stages. So everyone in the room, there's a place for you in the College of Human Sciences. We would love to use these resources that you find to find your home and your place with us, and we'd love to work together to change the world. Thank you so very much for your time this afternoon. Thank you for being with us, and have a lovely afternoon. War Eagle.